one of our core values at our church is excellence. And we've defined excellence as not having the best, but doing the best with what you have.
Growth pressure, staffing questions, facility decisions, and the emotional weight of leading teams. That's the world executive pastors are navigating right now. Today on the unSeminary podcast, we're sitting down with an executive pastor from a prevailing church to unpack what leaders like you shared in the National Executive Pastor Survey, so you can lead forward with clarity.
Hey friends, welcome to the unSeminary podcast. So glad that you have decided to tune in. We are in the midst of is maybe a better way to say, these special set of podcasts where we're responding to what you said in the National Executive Pastor Survey, which turned out to be the largest dedicated or direct executive pastor survey that we're aware of ever, which is kind of cool. And hundreds of people logged in and gave us a sense of where ministry is at. And what we've been doing is spending time with an executive pastor from a prevailing church, and frankly, people I like, to get their thoughts on kind of what was surfaced. And today we've got a big one. This is a significant issue. In fact, it was the single biggest fear that was expressed. We asked a question around what's your kind of biggest fear for this year? And nearly 1 in 5 executive pastors expressed fear about this. And what is that fear? It's the whole issue of our facilities, space, capital projects, that sort of thing. Many churches are running out of kid space, parking, seating, lobby capacity. We're all worried about inflation of construction costs. If you got a building quoted on 5 years ago, you're going to want to get it quoted on again. Renovation, building, all of this stuff. And, we're excited to have today a return guest, Eric Garza, with us. He is from a fantastic church, Cross Church, which is located in Texas. It's one of the fastest growing churches in the country, and they have 12 campuses, if I'm counting correctly. So Eric has thought about facilities, and so excited to have you back on the show, Eric. Thanks for being here.
Rich, thanks for having me back. Good to have an opportunity to have a great conversation about a big topic for a lot of pastors and executives across the country. Yeah.
Well, you're going to solve all our problems for us today, Eric. So
you guys just some nuggets, what I've learned and from experience. But if I can make your life and your world a little bit better, awesome.
That's great. That's good. Kind of tell us a little bit about Cross again, kind of set the context, give us a bit of sense of the church.
Yeah. So we're in deep South Texas. Most of our campuses are within a half hour north of the U.S.-Mexico border. So right at the bottom of the tip of Texas. 30 years, going on 31 years as a ministry. In the last 8 years, we went from one site to now 7 locations, physical locations, and 12 campuses. We're a bilingual ministry, which means we have English campuses and we have Spanish campuses. And we recently, last year in 2025, launched our first campus outside of our region in San Antonio, Texas. And you can imagine a lot of victories and a lot of challenges, leaving your space, your comfort area, the region where you've been for 30 years, and then heading out and venturing off into what we believe God called us to do in Central Texas. So just phenomenal growth. We've seen God's hand upon our ministry, and it's come with, like I said, a lot of wins and a lot of challenges we've had to navigate. And being a predominantly Hispanic ministry that reaches both English congregants and Spanish congregants, dealing with cultural, political issues in our region of the country, has just been a whirlwind. But as anybody could imagine, it's been a big learning season for us for expansion. I know we're talking about facilities going from one site to multi-site, and all of that entails operationally, logistically, financially. So I wouldn't say we know it all. We certainly don't. If we're always learning, but man, if we can just impart any wisdom, we're all for that.
Love it. Well, I would say I actually re-looked at a lot of these fears, and the overall tone, if you were to kind of summarize the conversation that people seem to be expressing, is like there's this sense from a lot of executive pastors, listen, our ministry could grow, but our space, frankly, is holding us back, and we're not entirely sure what the path forward is. It's like, we see the physical space issues, but I'm not sure where to go from here. So I'd love to jump right in. How
Sure.
have you, as you've looked at your 7 physical locations, 12 campuses, how do you evaluate facility limitations? And are they the things that are actually restricting growth, or does the issue lie somewhere else? How are you discerning that when you look at, this whole issue?
Yeah, a lot of our growth has come from us planning campuses, but some of our growth has come from, I guess, what the corporate world calls mergers and acquisitions, where we've merged or really acquired other ministries who either had an existing facility that we took over, or where we partnered with them through the acquisition and launched a campus in a new building or a new facility. So some of the things that we've done is there's a whole process, right? That it entailed with going multi-site. And one of those big key indicators of whether the campus or the church plant is going to succeed is whether they have a sustainable facility that can house all aspects of the ministry. And sometimes that can be difficult to find. For example, you don't just want a meeting space to have services, right? You need maybe an office space, you need childcare space, you need meeting space, you need lobby, restrooms, you need adequate parking. And all of those factors come into play when you're looking to find the right space. And so for us, we've just been blessed that either we've, gone through the capital campaigns, we've gone through the funding, the internal funding to build new facilities, or the acquisitions that we've done over the last couple of years already had an existing facility, which is a plus because instead of building, we just went into a remodel phase to bring that building up to what we would call our cross standard to house our campus and facility. And so, I mean, it's a holistic approach. You look at parking, kid space. What you don't want to do, and what we've run into in the past, is it's okay to launch with limited space. But if you're launching and you already have a couple hundred people that are gathered, you're going to want to find a space that's going to give you ample room to have 1 or 2 services without having to crunch yourself in the short term. And it's going to, in a larger sense, going to really facilitate some challenge and some angst and frustrations early on. And you want to minimize as much of that, especially when you're launching and you're setting out to start a new campus or a new church.
Yeah, so that's one of those kind of pinch points would be too small, right? Like I'm assuming you've ended up in facilities where it's like, okay, this just frankly is too small, and so we've got to. Right. It's not going to work. We're going to have to start with 3 services, and that or something like that, or we'll start with 2 and we'll be pinched too quickly. Well, are there any other kind of tripwires that you've run into that are like, oh, like it might be great on these 5 things, but these, if it's not these 2 or 3, if these aren't right, we're not going in there. Are there any other things to get to, as you said, a sustainable facility? Are there any kind of big no-nos that you've bumped into, or maybe you wish you knew before? Tell me about that.
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one is don't start a church next to the railroad tracks. That may sound a little funny.
No, tell me more.
Know that during your Sunday morning message at your 10 o'clock service, roughly about 10:40 a.m., this train who's 2 or 3 blocks away is going to come blaring out and just completely disrupt your sound and your service and your message for a few minutes. So it may sound comical, but definitely don't do that. Right?
No, that's very good.
Yeah.
And even going and seeing, that's a great takeaway, because even going and seeing the facility during a Sunday morning, like, because you wouldn't know that if you're there just Tuesday afternoon or something, you would have no sense of that. But because it might be a train, but I could see lots of things where
confined to Monday through Friday.
Yes, yeah.
Every day as they need, and so you just never know. That has happened a couple of times, and it's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So,
that's
you play it off in the middle of the service, but man, it can mess with some stuff. The second thing I would say is this: when looking for a facility, there's obviously some internal perhaps pressure or self-imposed pressure as a pastor or an executive to want to get into a permanent facility right away. One of the things that helped us early on with a couple of our campuses is we actually rented. And here's the benefit of renting or leasing, even for a year or 2, as you grow that site, is number one, you're not worried about insurance. right? You're not worried
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
lawsuits. You're not worried about maintenance, or you're paying for that, right? But there's a lot that you minimize when it comes to overloading your mind and your
Mm-hmm.
brain about
Yep.
what you have to handle, right? And so you pay a fee, but the building's clean when you come in, and right after you you tear down your equipment for the service in your kids area, you don't have to worry about that because you're leasing a space. And so if
Yeah,
you
that's
can
good.
minimize, like I said, as much of the overload of operations and facilities on the front end, that's a great thing. And most spaces, right? What we did early on is, if we had an event center where we would rent the main auditorium, we would use conference rooms or
Mm-hmm.
multi-purpose rooms for childcare. We would safe
Mm-hmm.
proof them, right? All of our
Mm-hmm.
protocols in place. But that's what we would do early on, and it would give us a chance to test and gather some data.
That's
Is
so
this
good.
going to work long term? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Number one, we don't believe we missed God, but if after a
Mm-hmm.
couple of years this isn't going anywhere, well, thank God we didn't buy a building, because
Right.
now we're up a creek without a paddle, as they say. And so leasing is not an entirely bad idea on the
No, that's
early
great.
outset, but definitely the neighborhood that you're in, right,
Mm-hmm.
the side of town that you're in, you want to be in essentially as centrally as you can,
Mm-hmm.
centrally located as you can, and not next to a railroad track, or any industry or warehouses where there's going to be trucks, just for safety concerns, for the
Mm-hmm.
curbside appeal.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why public libraries, or where we actually launched started campuses, was at a public library acoustic set, because we couldn't be so loud.
Mm.
So all of those facility concerns are really things you want to keep in mind.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of the rental on the front end. What a great way it's good use of capital. It's a good, it gives you a chance to test,
Yeah.
even if you stay for a couple of years. That's fantastic. So you've been through multiple, capital campaigns, this whole process of, like, we got to raise money and then get a facility renovated, or, expand it or whatever. What do you wish you would have known before all of that? Well, are there a couple, like, things that either you stumbled upon, you stubbed your toe, or you wish, man, I wish somebody would have told me this? Are there any things that stand out to you?
I think the first one is this: you have a number in your mind, and of course you believe God for it.
And it's
Uh,
lower. It's going to come in lower every time.
it is unless God does a miracle, which He is more than able to do.
Yes.
It's going to come in lower, and so I think have high anticipation but realistic expectations,
Right.
because most capital campaigns are campaigns that are above normal giving.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And
Yep.
so, at least for us, it's above normal giving. We
Yep.
encourage and we get people to give towards a specific capital campaign, which is for a
Mm-hmm.
specific campus or a specific
Mm-hmm.
project, or what have you. But you have this number in mind, and then you can tend to, early on, it's not coming in yet, or maybe you've done it for a year, or you've given a
I see.
specific
Okay.
timeline.
Yep.
And you can get quickly discouraged, especially with capital campaigns, where you're like, we're halfway through this thing and not even half has come in yet, or what we thought would come in. And so it's easy to get discouraged. But that was a big thing, is that number in your mind, it's going to be lower. And that's not a bad thing, right? That's not a bad thing. People are giving to a capital campaign above of their normal giving, sacrificially. They're giving by faith. They're giving with expectation. But at the same time, for those of us on the inside, right, those of us who are managing the resources and what have you, it's about having a realistic expectation that we have the faith that God can do it, but we're also going to budget ourselves knowing that if there's a high probability, not impossible, there's a high probability that the number we had in mind is not going to be what comes in for the capital campaign.
Let's talk about that. So there's an interesting. So I've seen that for sure in churches. There's an interesting kind of tension that pulls in two different directions. One, you can have exactly what you're talking about, which is, we thought we would go in, we were hoping we would raise X and we raised something less than that.
Yeah.
But then the other part of it is we were hoping the project was going to cost X and it costs X plus, it's costing us more than we anticipated. How do you manage that tension? How have you been able to kind of navigate that? That's a tough tension.
Yeah. The longevity of the capital campaign is not always going to be exactly match it's not going rather to exactly match what the building construction cost was at the beginning. Prices fluctuate and prices change. And so let's say you have, let's use a rough even number, $1 million capital campaign for your church organization. And the construction is going to cost, I don't know, $950,000. Well, $1 million should cover it. But by the time the $1 million or short of that comes in, well, your budget's now at 1.2 or 1.3. Right. It's fluctuated. And so the what's congruent at the beginning can be really a little bit financially off by the time in other words, the timelines of the capital campaign and your building project sometimes don't align perfectly. And we run into that too, where we've had to take from our operating budget a little bit, or we've had to really emphasize a certain amount during the campaign because that's what needs to come in. We've, met with key givers and donors of the church. And those are challenges that you navigate during the capital campaign process. And like I said earlier, it's challenging because, well, let me backtrack and say this. This is why on the front end, you should add margin into your capital campaign.
That's good.
Which is, we didn't do that perhaps the first go around. But certainly the later seasons, we added margin in our capital campaigns to account for any fluctuation in construction costs. And if there was ever a surplus, well, we would tell the church it's because of your giving and because of your support and generosity that we had more than enough come in. That's and good. So now we're going to use those funds for X, or they're going to go back to the general fund or whatever the case. But I think the key there would be to incorporate some 10 to 15% margin in your capital campaign on the outset to account for anything that might happen 12, 15, 18 months down the road.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. That's good. You maybe just save somebody a lot of headache 2 years from now because of that part of the conversation. I want to go back to something you talked about earlier. You've had multiple buildings that you've acquired or you've merged with, and you were talking about remodeling, and there's that can be a blessing and a curse. Like it can be amazing. Like, wow, this is great. And, you open up a wall and who knows what's behind that wall. And, there's all that. And you talked about bringing it up to the cross standard. Talk me through how have you decided what that is? What is the cross standard? And what are the common things that you find, we've got to make this change? And how have you kind of defined that as you think about projects like that?
Yeah. So over the last few years, we've pretty much honed in on, I guess, the vibe and the look of what we want our campuses to feel and look like. They may be different floor plans because some of them we built, some of them we acquired, properties we took over. But as far as color schemes, we do our very best to match wall colors, sanctuary colors. We use the same stage equipment, both branding and layout as best as possible across all of our sanctuary auditoriums, our stages. Our kids' spaces, we have an internal ratio of how many teachers or volunteers per infants, per toddlers, for school-age children we want. And so that determines our spacing. And so sometimes we've had to knock some walls down or build some walls in to accommodate for what, like I said, our standard of ministry, both in appeal, but also in care for our congregants and for our families. And so when we remodel, you're right, there's some things that once you knock down a wall, you're not going to know until you knock it down. And that's where that margin comes in. But for the most part, right, we do inspections, we get third party opinions on the building, on the cost estimates, and like we would encourage anybody to do, right? But that's our cross standard: is the look, the feel, the equipment, the wall colors. Is there enough space for our guest connect area, our next steps area? For first impressions, does every ministry have adequate space to store their items? All of those factors come into play in deciding how we're going to remodel a facility. And I'll say the second thing is, this is why before you break or before you knock down a wall, get an inspector or get some people either in your church or in the construction industry or somebody that you know in your community, because sometimes when you have a building, your initial thought is to remodel. That may not always be the most financially wise decision. And here's why. because you may not know all that you're going to encounter, you may in the long run end up spending just as much as if you had built a brand new facility with the exact floor plan you want. And so that's where evaluating and deciding, is it more feasible to remodel this building for X amount of dollars? Or are we within a 5 to 10% budget margin where we might just say it's in the best interest of the church perhaps to use either this facility as collateral for our next building or a brand new building, or is it better to use it as a multi-site building, multi-purpose building, and we end up building a new facility for the church or for the campus? And so those cost estimates are going to help you make the best, most informed decision of where you're going to steward the resources financially in either remodeling or in building a site.
Yeah, I love that. One of my favorite churches, Mercy Hill Church in North Carolina, they had a building that was given to them, and they weren't entirely sure what to it was in a part of town. They weren't necessarily sure they wanted to launch a campus, and just they had a campus closer and all that. And they ended up turned it into really a student center. And it's a fantastic ministry building, and it's active, 5-6 days a week. Now they don't do Sunday morning services there, but they do all kinds of other stuff, which is fantastic. Like, is a great,
we've seen that too. Yeah, they use it for leadership meetings, for small chapel receptions or gatherings or next gen events, youth, young adults, even renting it out to the community as a means to supply income to the church,
daycare or something.
Aligned organizations, of course, whatever your church policy is. But yeah, sometimes the best use of that building is not for church services.
Have you run into facilities that you've evaluated and then decided, no, like this is going to cost way too much to renovate, and so we won't go forward with that? Have you run into that after evaluation?
Well, not entirely, but I'll say this.
I know that risk is there for sure.
Yeah, there is risk. And the risk assessment is different when you're leasing a space or and when you're obviously building your own facility, as far as including the costs associated with that. One of our campuses recently, and I mean in the last 24 months, before we moved into our new building, was leasing a space, and we were given the option to remodel the space we were leasing. Because though it was suitable for what we needed for the ministry, for Sunday services and all the other ministries, parts of it were not really conducive to growth for the congregation and for the ministry. So we did contemplate remodeling. I think what kept us from doing that, number one, is whatever you remodel for the landlord is going to end up keeping. And so the return on that investment would be short-term and not long-term. We were already in the midst of building our building, but we were growing at a rapid rate. And so we were 8-12 months out from being in our building, and the campus was growing. And so we needed a short-term solution. So we did think, well, we'll spend X amount of dollars to remodel our site where we're leasing before we get into the new building. But we found out that shifting our service times and doing different strategies ended up alleviating in the short term the constraints we had to give us a time to get into our new building, which is now more than enough space for us to grow for years and years to come.
Right. That's cool. Yeah, because I've said I feel like I've been in a ton of conversations with XPs where, they're talking about this issue, and, there's like a building that maybe it's another church that's come to them and they're having a conversation, and I would say their mindset is like, I'm not sure we should do this. Like they're like, this other church came to us, and statistically, actually the most likely for these mergers to succeed are when the joining church comes to the lead church. So they would come to your church and be like, hey, we're interested. So it actually happens a fair amount. And I feel like I've tried to talk so many executive pastors into like, man, it's got to be a really bad building. Particularly if it's like has debt or has no debt or very little debt on it, it's got to be a very bad building to not want to take it. Cause it's like, you can invest, a moderate amount of money. You don't need to dump a ton into it and get something great. And like you said, as long as you're above board with everybody, 5 years from now, if it doesn't work, you could take that asset, sell it, and move on and use those resources somewhere else.
And that's very good, because when you talk about acquiring a ministry, especially if it has a low balance on their mortgage, or they don't have much to pay off the building. And if you're in a position to pay that off within the first year of acquiring the ministry, think of the collateral and the equity that your organization now has because of that new facility that's in your portfolio. And I know it
100%.
sounds very business minded, but when you're looking to expand into the future, even at another site in your church ministry organization, you now have more collateral, more resources to leverage for a better financial position in the future when you do want to actually build a building. And the second thing is this: if you're acquiring a ministry that already has an existing building, in most cases, it's already built out for church purposes. So that's very helpful. So at that point, you may be putting in a smaller amount in just, refurbishing it, painting the walls, putting some new equipment, some new screens, maybe changing out the flooring a little bit or some of the fixtures in different spaces
or whatever,
because it's already built out for a church. And so that's the benefit of going or acquiring a ministry, if you're going that route, that already has an existing facility.
Yeah, we had we were running, our budget was about $8 million, and we had a church come to us, and they had a tough season, and the summer before we ended up merging with them, or they joined us really, they had multiple Sundays where they had two people show up on Sunday. They had the person that was preaching and the guy that was opening the door. Like it had really atrophied down. And I remember in one of those conversations, they had a bit of a roof problem. The facility was worth just probably south of 2 million. It was like a great facility, but they had a roof problem. And I remember one of the elders leader person, he said, we got a quote on the roof, and it's going to cost maybe about $15,000 to fix. Do you think you guys will be able to fix that? And they had no debt and were going to give us their building. Well, like I humbly had to say, yeah, we'll be okay. Like it's gonna be fine. Like, what I didn't want to say is like, I feel like our youth guys have like wasted $15,000 this year. Like, it's like we can, the exchange just on paper. And again, that's not why you go into those conversations, but a part of that is, particularly in our seats as executive pastors, that's a part of what we have to wrestle through and think about those things. So let's get back to the renovation thing. A lot of what churches were talking about is like pressure of like, man, our physical facilities are holding us back. Any other thoughts around, changes you've made to increase capacity, or, things that maybe are like some low hanging fruit or creative solutions that maybe we're not thinking about, but as a leader who's been through this, you've wrestled through that we could, benefit from?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things. You can't please everybody, right? So
good.
I think one of the ministry pressures is, well, we want to please the next gen. We also want to please the childcare. We also want to please the elders of the church, and we also want to please the younger families of the church and young professionals. And when you're in a facility that wasn't originally built according to your specs, it's going to be difficult to do that. And so you have to focus, as we have, on the most critical areas: sanctuary and childcare. If you don't have childcare, it's going to be a barrier to growth because families or parents are not going to have the comfort level they need to come to your church on a regular basis and to be a part of the community. And so for us, when we've remodeled, the first things we look at are sanctuary and then the kid space. Do we have enough adequate kid space? Some of the solutions when we've been limited in space is launching multiple services. We have a smaller sanctuary or smaller space. We'll offer more service opportunities. Or when it comes to our kids ministry, we've evaluated with our kids directors and our kids department of how can we best merge age groups to maximize a space that we have. So if you have an ideal facility where you have, your childcare divided by grade level or age level, sometimes you have the amenity to do that, and many times you don't. And so what we've done is, instead of having first grade on their own, maybe we'll put, kindergarten and first grade level kids together.
Yeah, that's good.
Second and third together, fourth and fifth together, as a way to consolidate, because we don't have the space that we prefer to have, at least in this season. And so for us, sometimes you're not watering down, in essence, the content, the quality, but you are consolidating in the short term, or even medium term, if you will, if that's even a term, to make adequate space for the constraints that you may have. And
That's good.
so you have 600 members and you only have a 200 seat sanctuary or 250. Well, that's an opportunity for 3 services.
Right.
Is that a strain? It can be if you see it from a poor perspective versus a perspective of, man, we're so large and we have the space. One of our core values at our church is excellence, and we've defined excellence as not having the best, but doing the best with what you have.
Oh,
So
that's good.
we may not have a 1,000-seat auditorium for this growing congregation, but what we do have, we're going to utilize it and steward it to our best ability. So if that means 2 or 3 services, well, God give us the strength and the people to manage and to lead and to execute 3 strong services every weekend or every Sunday in order to meet the need of the congregation that we have. And I think one of the biggest things, Rich, is also communicating this. It's keeping the congregation right. You're not going to go into all the details per se, unless that's your preference and that's your senior pastor's prerogative. But to share with them the overarching theme of, hey, here's where we're at as a ministry. Here's our facility. And here's what we're going to do to continue to offer as best a ministry as we can, while at the same time being cognizant of the challenges that we're facing. We said this to our staff and to our church many times, is we don't look at obstacles as negatives. We look at obstacles as opportunities. Okay,
That's so
if
true.
this is what we have, how can we be as excellent as possible with what we have? If that means going to a 3rd service, well, then we're going to give it a shot, because what we don't want to do is allow facility constraints to translate into diminished capacity or into a diminishing congregation. And I'm talking about numerically, because a diminishing congregation numerically also means a diminishing budget and revenue financially, because you have less givers in the seats. And those are some of the challenges that you got to navigate. So we don't see it as obstacles. We don't see obstacles necessarily as a challenge. We see it as an opportunity of, okay, how can we navigate around this mountain, if you will, to continue to provide as excellent a ministry as we can.
Yeah, I love that. I love your example of the kids' age size rooms, because I think you're articulating a tension that whenever particularly if we're launching, we talked a lot about this, like renovating other spaces and new campuses and all that, where I think really is germane to our job as executive pastor to manage this tension of, we want it to feel, the language you used was cross standard. It absolutely has got to be cross standard, but there will be areas where we're going to have to compromise. Like, that is just true. And a part of what we have to do, we have to use our leadership and our discernment and, get the right players in the room and have the conversation. And, somebody, using your example, somebody in kids ministry be like, no, we can't combine them together. That'll be terrible. And it's like, we're going to be fine. Like, we'll figure it out,
It's
it's going to be okay. We'll help that navigate. And that's one example, but there's a ton of those that can come up in these, in these renovations for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And people are always going to have opinions.
Right.
But I'll say this from experience, and I mean no ill intent towards anybody in your congregation or your ministry.
Yep.
Most of the people that are criticizing are the people that aren't giving anyway. And so I'm not saying ignore them by any means. They're part of your ecosystem. They're part of your church. They're part of your flock.
That's very true.
But just always with a grain of salt, because the people that are really bought into your ministry are going to walk through those opportunities alongside you, hopefully with the best attitude that they possibly can muster up, because this too shall pass, right? If you've gone out in faith to plant or to grow or to expand your congregation, this is a temporary season. It's not a permanent season. You won't always be at 3 or 4 services, right? Or multiple services. At some point, if God is in this and you really believe he is, and I believe he is for many organizations and ministries, the timing will be right when you have a facility that can house what you need, or that can provide the amenities and space that you need. And so for parents, for givers, for guests, is just letting them know as best you can, even subtly, through announcements or even messages, is say, hey, we're in a season of growth and expansion. Growth doesn't always look, perfect. And so we have seasons where we're going to navigate some challenges and opportunities as best we can to get us to an end goal. This is a means to an end. What we're going through is a means to get us to where we want to go as a ministry. And as long as you keep that at the forefront, tying it into the vision of the house, you're going to see that in a large sense, you're going to have people rally behind that idea and unfocus, if you will, from the constraints of the facility to the broader appeal of what God is doing in the ministry.
Yeah, that is so good. Friends, you should go back and re-listen to what Eric just said there. That is some wise advice. And obviously from somebody that's been in the trenches a lot. That's been my experience as well. The people, the complainers. I'm reading through the book of Job right now, and I'm like, man, his friends are just like, this guy needs better friends. And there
Yeah.
that reminded me of the people you're talking about. Like,
Yeah.
there's these people who are just, sniping from the cheap seats, and they're not really engaged in the mission where, man, those people that are right on in the middle of it, they're like, let's go, let's lean in. And man, that's the kind of person I'm hoping as I transition into older age that I'm that person, because we have a number of those people at our church that I look at that are like, these are incredible saints who have seen so much change, and who I'm sure lots of things annoy them, but they're fired up for the mission. They're excited, in our case, to reach unchurched people, to see people who are far
If
from
you're
Jesus
not
get
changing, you're not
connected.
making progress, right? And
Yeah, absolutely.
the fact that your ministry is facing opportunities, or obstacles rather disguised as opportunities, is proof positive you're going somewhere. You're not a
Yes.
stagnant ministry. You're not a lazy ministry, right? You're not apathetic.
Mm-hmm.
You're really out to fulfill the vision that God has given you or to your senior leadership. And so it's proof positive, right? And so take
Mm-hmm.
that as a badge of honor in some way to say, we must be doing something right.
So good. Well, Eric, just as we're coming to kind of land, this has been a great conversation. Hopefully been helpful for you, friends, as you've been listening in. But as we kind of come to land today's conversation, what's a question or two that you're kicking around for this year at Cross as you're thinking about 2026? Where's your head at? What are the things you're wondering? It doesn't have to be about this; could be anything.
Yeah, well, thanks for letting me speak into that, Rich. I think for me as an executive and looking at our ministry, um, looking at the previous 30 years and looking at the next decade, if you will, of where God is going to take our ministry, being one of America's fastest growing churches, being the largest bilingual Hispanic led ministry in the country. We've, like I've said in a previous episode with you, we haven't had any precedent for us in our context. And so
Right.
we've navigated a lot of uncharted waters,
Mhm.
and learned from both wins and losses and different opportunities and struggles to get us to where we're at now. I think one of the biggest questions facing the church at large in 2026 is how the church is going to respond to the ever increasingly fast paced changes that we're seeing on the political front, on the cultural front. I'm not saying that the church has to be a political response. The church has to provide a biblical response to
Yep.
what we're seeing. And with the fast-paced nature of culture and society and trends, I don't believe it's the church's responsibility to respond to every trend or to everything, but certainly the overarching elements of our current culture and political dynamic, where there is a biblical either mandate or precedent for it, that the church would speak into that and provide biblical perspective
Good.
and wisdom for how people should think about certain topics that have a biblical or moral prerogative. And so
Mhm.
navigating that as an organization, because as a growing church and being such a large ministry, you can imagine the opinions. We have people in our church who are conservative and some who are not. We have people who belong to one political party over another. We're in multiple communities, and so different communities have different demographics, different cultural contexts, different policy initiatives. There's a lot going on. And as a church ministry, especially us that we're multi-site, one of the biggest questions I'm asking myself and our team is, how do we, number one, stay biblically founded, right, and unwavering in what the biblical standard is. Number two is, how do we address the different things and different occurrences in different communities that we're in? If we were just one side in one community, well, then we would just be, I guess you could say, in our own little space, in our own little focus. But we have multi-site, so we have multi-focus, if you will, and how we continue to provide as excellent a ministry as possible, keeping Jesus at the forefront, above the fray, and at the same time giving a biblical perspective so that people have the right biblical worldview for how to walk out their journey of faith, their relationship with Christ, but at the same time, how to respond to what's happening in our world. I think for many times, for many years, really for decades, the church has abdicated its biblical responsibility, if you will, to speak into things, not from a political perspective, but from a biblical perspective. And because of that abdication of responsibility, we've seen a lot of things that have happened. Thankfully, in recent seasons, in recent years, we've seen a shift where faith is now at the forefront. And so, though I have that question, my biggest I guess you could say, prerogative is to leverage that people are focused more on faith, that people are open to faith now more so in our country, that people are focused more on this person of Jesus, is to leverage that as an opportunity to really hone in and speak and to people's hearts and minds and into the different communities that we're in, so that they have the right biblical perspective, the biblical worldview to carry out what God has enabled them or called them to do.
Yeah, that's so good. I love what you're saying there. And I know I had a friend say, if you're, we all are serving in a context. We serve in a particular time, in a particular cultural context, and God's called us to lead in that context. And if you're not feeling the pull from, multiple sides, multiple polarities, you're like, well, everybody here agrees with me, then it means you're not actually reaching your community, and the fact that you're feeling that tension means, okay, like there's people from a wide variety of, and it can be all different, political's one, but there's lots of different ways to think of that. And yeah, that's so true. I really appreciate this. Well, Eric, you're a blessing to us. I thank you so much for giving us time today and helping us think about these things as we kick off into 2026. Where do we want to send people if they want to track with you or with the church? How do we want to get people connected to Cross?
Yeah, well, Rich, thanks for the opportunity. And it's what a blessing for us and for me personally to be able to just share some thoughts. And if it helps anybody, we'll praise God for that. I think if you want to follow the church, we're crosschurchonline.com or crosschurch RGV on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, all of, most of the social media platforms. You want to connect with me, I'd be happy to connect with you at Eric, ERICP Garza. On any of the social media platforms. It'd be a privilege for me to help you guys and to share some thoughts and even answer questions. I'd be more than happy to do that. If I can serve your ministries in any way, by all means, feel free to reach out to me on any of the social media platforms.
Nice. Thanks so much, Eric. Really appreciate you being here today, sir. Thank you.
God bless you. Appreciate it.